Good evening. You are tuning in to Awani Tonight with me, Farhana Sheh. States may buy their own COVID-19 vaccines but will be competing with Putrajaya for delivery. And we speak to a pro-Palestinian activist in Jerusalem. That's coming up. Malaysia marked a grim record today, reporting 47 COVID-19 deaths along with 4,865 new infections. Selangor tops the list of highest number of new cases with 1,743, followed by Sarawak with 512. Health Director General Tan Sri Dr. Nur Hisham Abdullah has expressed concern over the emergence of new variants as many patients do not show any symptoms. He revealed that some of their screening tests often came back negative, but they were already in critical condition. He said most individuals infected with these variants did not show symptoms such as cough or fever, but they experienced joint pain, tiredness and loss of appetite. Coordinating Minister for the National COVID-19 Immunization Programme, Khairi Jamaluddin, clarified today that state governments were permitted to secure their own COVID-19 vaccines so long as these were approved by the National Pharmaceutical Regulatory Agency. Khairi said that based on the agreements between the Malaysian government and the vaccine manufacturers, the supply of vaccines must prioritise the previous orders from the federal government. This would mean that existing orders must be fulfilled before the vaccine makers are able to supply to any other parties, including the state governments, private hospitals and industries that placed their orders after the federal government. State governments such as Selangor, Penang and Sarawak have repeatedly expressed their desire to procure vaccines for their state residents independently of the federal government. The Malaysian Medical Association is concerned over the quality of some of the RTK antigen test kits available in the market. The association claimed that some of these kits have failed in detecting positive cases. Therefore, President Professor Datuk Dr. Subramania Muniandi said in an open letter that there are 17 RTK antigen test kits that have been approved by the Medical Device Authority, but not all have been of acceptable quality. MMA claimed that they have received several complaints from practitioners and questioned whether or not regular audits are being carried out once the kits are approved and released into the market. The association also called for updates on the kits' efficacy in detecting the newer variants, as there have already been reports of the newer variants in the country. The fate of private higher education institutions looks bleak if new student enrollments continue to decline. Since the start of the pandemic, there has been a reduction in the number of student enrollment, with the overall drop from 20 to 50%. Economist at Malaysia University of Science and Technology, Dr. Jeffrey Williams, says if the trend continues, this institution face permanent closure.
There are lots of issues in terms of the business model for private universities. And the main issue has been that they are concentrating on student fees for their revenue model. And they haven't diversified their revenue model beyond that. So some universities account for 90 or 95% of their income comes from student fees. So when they are faced with this systemic shock, which of course is nothing to do with them, really. It's completely outside of their control. But the impact is that the students can't come. And this is both local students who are delaying going to the universities because they're not going to get a full campus experience, or their high school exams have been delayed, for example. And then, of course, the international students, they can't come because of the travel restrictions. And what this has meant is we have seen a significant drop in the number of students. And that, of course, causes a significant drop in revenues.
He added that as revenues drop, it leaves institutions no choice but to cut costs, which in turn affects the quality of their programs. Therefore, Jeffrey said it is important for the Ministry of Higher Education to look into the overall funding model for private and public institutions, including reassessing the Malaysia Education Blueprint 2015 to 2025 to align it with current pandemic challenges.
We need to look at the the overall funding profile in Malaysia, particularly PTPTN, for example, for local students, which is the main source of funds through the student loan system. Now, before the pandemic, the chairman of PTPTN, Wan Saiful, was saying that there are significant stability issues in PTPTN. And he was very open and very honest and produced a full report saying that these things have to be looked at quite closely because it's not sustainable in the long term. Now, that's a source of income that the private universities rely on heavily. In fact, as much as 60 or 70% of their income comes from student loans. And if that's not sustainable in the long term, then it means that there is a systematic problem. And so we need to look at the whole thing, not at the individual business models of individual universities, or the question of introducing new programs online or switching existing programs online or not. These will not solve the problem. We need to look at it more holistically.
We'll take a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. US President Joe Biden has voiced his support for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in a call to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Biden, however, stopped short of demanding an immediate end to hostilities and once again blocking a UN Security Council statement calling for a cessation of violence that have killed more than 200 people, most of them Palestinians. Israel, meanwhile, continued airstrikes on Gaza Strip hours after Biden voiced support for a ceasefire. On Monday, the US blocked the adoption of a joint UN Security Council statement by China, Tunisia and Norway, calling for a halt to violence in Jerusalem, the third time in a week. The Council held 3 emergency meetings, but common ground was out of reach, with Israel's main ally, the US, accused of obstructing the effort. So far, 212 Palestinians, including 61 children and 36 women, were killed since hostilities began last week, while 10 people, including 2 children, were killed in Israel. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu may have gained a political lifeline from the ongoing violence between Israel and Palestine. Netanyahu looked to be on the verge of losing power, which he has held for the past 12 years. But the escalation of the current situation has given him extra time to make a political move. Israeli author, human rights and Palestinian activist Miko Pellet talks to US from Jerusalem.
So this is completely driven by Netanyahu. He knew that this was going to help cement his premiership, and it has. I mean, any negotiations for an alternate government without him have completely fallen apart. He's very strong now domestically, very popular domestically. He's very popular internationally as well. I mean, world leaders, everyone from the President of the United States to prime ministers in Europe and the Chancellor of Germany, Austria, and Germany are all supporting him 110%. Very, very strong. And this, of course, helps cement it because now his support is across the board. It's much easier for him to form a coalition right now. And he is, without a doubt, going to continue, will remain as prime minister.
Pellet adds that Israel has been particularly heavy-handed on its recent attacks on Gaza due to fear of a stronger, unified voice from Palestinians. Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, the West Bank and Israel live under different governments and have increasingly developed separate identities. But Palestinian activists hope to unite people across the 3 territories in a general strike today to protest Israel's continuing bombardment of Gaza Strip.
There's a very deep connection between what happened in Jerusalem over the last few weeks, what is happening in Gaza now, what is happening in other parts of Palestine. People tend to either ignore or forget the fact that this is the Palestinian people live throughout all of Palestine, and it's the same issue that they're all fighting for. So in other words, they like to say that in Gaza it's Hamas, in the West Bank it's somebody else, in the Palestinian communities who are citizens of Israel it's a different thing, but it's not. It's the exact same issue. Palestinians are fighting for their rights. The Palestinians are fighting for their right to exist, for the right to have water, to the right to worship in Jerusalem, for the right to live in dignity, for the right to protect Al-Aqsa.
127 people were missing after a vessel sank as it drifted away off Mumbai's coast during Cyclone Tauktae. The vessel carrying 273 people went adrift as strong winds hit India's west coast. The remaining 146 were rescued as operations expected to continue throughout the day. The Indian Navy said 2 ships and helicopters were also deployed to assist in the search. The major cyclone, biggest to hit the region in decades, claimed lives in parts of the country. Thousands of people were evacuated, while authorities in Mumbai shifted about 600 COVID-19 patients in field hospitals to safer locations. On to other updates around the world. Thailand reported a daily record of deaths from COVID-19. Authorities said 35 people died on Tuesday as the country battles a third wave of infections. The country also reported 2,473 new infections. The surge in cases in the past weeks have been driven by an outbreak in several prisons. Taiwan is mobilizing its diplomats to hunt for speedier delivery of COVID-19 vaccines following a sudden rise in domestic cases. Taiwan has vaccinated less than 1% of its 23 million population and has received only about 300,000 AstraZeneca vaccines, and those are rapidly running out. President Tsai Ing-wen said that the government hopes to begin providing domestically made COVID-19 vaccines before the end of July. Taiwan reported more than 700 new local infections the past week, leading to new curbs in Taipei and shocking a population that had become accustomed to life carrying on almost normally in the past year. Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison said it was still not safe to allow fully vaccinated residents to travel overseas. Australia is sticking to plans to start reopening to the rest of the world only from the middle of next year, resisting mounting pressure to end the closure of international borders. It hopes to fully vaccinate its 26 million population by the end of this year. We have over 1,000 care homes nationally, which house some of the most vulnerable in this pandemic. But have its residents and staff been prioritized in the vaccine rollout? Tonight on Consider This, we ask our panelists what must be done. That is all we have for you on Awani Tonight. Get the latest news update on COVID-19 and COVID-19 vaccines from astroawani.com and Astro Awani app. I'm Fahana Sheikh. We'll see you again.